welcome to the stream. As usual, I've got a handful of things I'm taking care of. Take this minute to welcome everybody to my channel if you haven't seen it. Also, wanted to let everybody know, hey, if you like the content and you want to subscribe, it's pretty cool, and I appreciate it. And there's also a Patreon, so it's just patreon.com/Phoenix Gaming Space. So, if you like supporting me, I appreciate it, and thanks. In addition, I've got some events coming up here again. I I let everybody know this was going to be a pretty busy month. So, what we're going to do here today, we're going to recap the Highlander event that I just was in on Saturday, last Saturday, and then I've got another one coming up this Saturday. We'll do a recap on that. And we're going to kind of go over some takeaways, some lessons learned from those events. It was a thing, right? So let's dig in right now. Boop. That's not what we needed. That's okay. So round one. Excuse me, man. I need more water, evidently. Before we dig into this, all right, let's talk about round one. I played, or it was a Highlander event. You had the rule of one instead of rule of three, and the so you could only take one instance of each data sheet, and then that restriction was not imposed on troops and dedicated transports. And actually, before we get into the results, let's go over my list a little bit. I know we talked about it once. We're gonna dig into it right now. And if you have not used the PC version of Battlescribe, it's actually really good. There's a few features it doesn't have that the mobile one does, which is kind of sad, but it is still really good, right? And I spend a lot of time at my computer, so it's really handy for me. All right, so I ran just. Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that, Captain Cuddles Muff. I think you just wanted to hear me say that. Man, sorry. That reading that out loud really just threw me off. Okay, so we're gonna go over the list. I did run Cabalites and I ran Witches. I didn't run any rack units. I struggle personally with space raids. It's a thing I'm actually kind of working on right now. So I ran Drukari. I did bring an Archon. He didn't have anything. I am doing it. I'm keeping it up. I'm gonna keep on keeping on. I didn't give him anything. I probably should have given him the Helm of Smite. Okay, the Helm of Spite, so that I had a denial on the board. So he just has just his regular loadout, right? He had a Venom Blade and he had a Splinter Pistol. The Venom Blade is poison 2, and then the Splinter Pistol was poison 4, obviously. My Cabal, I took a custom Cabal actually, which was the Toxin Crafters, and that's my hit rolls of 6 are poison 2, and then all my poison weapons reroll wounds of 1. It was pretty solid. I have no complaints over it. There were a few different options I was looking at, and I just kind of picked one of the three, and I have no complaints about it. I think maybe if I'd have done Poison Tongue or the hit rolls of 6 explode and then wounds of 6 or an additional AP for my splinter or shooting, I think that would have probably felt a little bit better to me. But this was fine. It did exactly what it needed to do, and I only had one game where my poison weapons didn't do much, but we'll get into that. I did bring Drazar. We know him colloquially as Big Dick Drazar, and there's a reason for it. He is just bonkers. You know, he's got Ancient Warrior. He subtracts 1 from damage. He's got a 4-up invuln, and then all incubi within 6 inches of him. Add 1 to the wound roll and the fight phase, and he does have the incubi keyword, so he gives it to himself. And then he does the Tormentor's ability where you roll 2d6 against leadership to force a unit to fight last. Tormentors is one of those abilities where it's not very good until it is, because you have to roll so high most of the time. And really what I try to do is I try to put the Incubi and Drazar into the same unit to force that unit to fight last. Like, it just gives me extra dice to force it. All right. So he's got two profiles. He either fights at Strength 5 or Strength 6. And the Strength 5 does 2 additional attacks, but the Strength 6 does just the base 5 attacks. But it is 3 damage. So again, and he just fights twice, right? He fights twice every fight phase. And that's right here. And because that doesn't say at the end of the phase, he fights twice in whatever priority he's in, right? So if I charge with him, he gets to activate as a charger, and then he gets to activate again as a charger. And so he's just silly. He is just a massive, massive beat stick. Again, was really good in every game except for one. I got a unit of Trueborn, 2 blasters and a splinter cannon, and a splinter, or 2 blasters and a splinter cannon was my loadout for him. Probably could have taken a dark lance and it would have been a bit better, but I had no issues like with them hitting on 2s all the time, and then that splinter cannon having hits of 6 or poison 2. It didn't feel bad. Again, uh, they were fine. And then I had a brick of 16 Cabalites, and again, they were fine. Just blasters and a splinter. No splinter rifle or cannon there. Just blasters. And again, no complaints. Uh, they did what they needed to. 5 incubi, which we've talked about. A ravager, and that was just to give me a little bit more heavy weapons presence, and it was fine. I'm not a fan of ravagers, but I think a lot of it is because what I tend to play. I think if you play there's one faction that gives you like a hit reroll and one faction that gives you a wound reroll, and I think if you play either of those, Ravagers feel a lot better because they only get 3 Dark Lance shots. So being able to reroll those Dark Lances, either hits or wounds, is just going to make it feel a lot better. But it's still one of those things where your opponent has to account for it, because it can just go off. If I get 3 hits and 3 wounds, that's a lot of damage that can go through, right? And then a Venom. And then the Venom was obviously in the Cabal so that I could run my 2 Splinter Cannons on it, and then I could just have 6 shots. So, again, it was fine. No issues, no complaints. The Witches, Curse Blade. I struggle to not run Curse Blade. I just love it so much. That's really the witch cult I've been playing since I started picking up Drukhari, and it just is really nice having Strength 5 witches. You know, it's it is. It's silly. And I had 10 Blood Brides. They didn't have any special weapons. The sergeant had a power sword, and it's one of those where, man, like the additional 3 points of rend on wound rolls of 6 for your Blood Brides. Looking at people and being like, "Hey, my power sword's -6." Like, sorry. Was pretty funny, but at the same time, like, they're Blood Brides. They did what they need to do. I'm not completely sold on them being worth the points, but I'm going to keep running them. They always do work, so I can't complain. Like, they always do work, right? The Succubus has the Triptych Whip and the other thing, Precision Blows, Precise Strikes, whatever it's called. So her hit rolls of 6 do 2 mortals, and they're poison 2. Like, it's the only combo that makes sense, because she should not be something that, I'm trying to think of the right way to word this. Like, I have not found another combo that I enjoy. I might look into the Cursed Blade. I think it's the Relic, where her saving throws of 4 are a mortal wound back, so that every time I just successfully make a save, I do a mortal back. But then I got to give up the Precise Strikes and the Triptych Whip, and that just does so much damage. Like, she is just a terrifying unit with that combo. All right, so obviously some witches, and these were just, backfield objective holders, stuff like that. They're cheap. Cabalites probably would have been a better option just because they're a little bit cheaper, but that's okay. Unit of Mandrakes, I'm so mixed on them. I want to like them, but I struggle to kind of get any utility out of them because they don't get any army bonuses and they don't really do anything, right? Like they're -1 to hit, they have a 5-up invuln, and once per game they can teleport, which makes them pretty solid for things like Knockman data or battlefield data or whatever data you want to call it. Um, but it's just one of those where I struggle to get much utility out of them simply because I need my units to be engaging. And if they're not engaging, it's one of those where I don't know. I need to. I don't have a lot of throwaway units in this list. If I did, it'd be different. I probably could have built it differently, so I did. You know. 10 Hellions. I enjoy Hellions a lot, and it's one of those where, again, probably 5 is better or 2 units at 10. I don't know. I don't like running MSUs for certain things. Like, I don't like small units of incubi. I'd rather have 10 incubi than 5 incubi because I want to make sure whatever they touch goes away because they're not taking much return fire, right? And then the Hellions, the same thing. Like they're okay. They're moderately tanky. They have an actual armor save. It's not great. And then they move 14. They're a surgical unit though. You have to be careful with them. I did have 5 scourges. 4 of them had shredders. The shredder's okay. Probably should have taken haywire or like heat lances or something, but the shredder was fine. It's one of those where it never did poorly. It just didn't shine either. I did take a Tantalus. It is in my witch cult, and that was because then when I fight, I'm at strength 8, right? And then also because if I get into the melee, it's saving throws of 6 or a mortal wound back. And we'll kind of get into the Tantalus and everything else. And then 2 Raiders who also had the Witch Cult instead of the Cabal. And again, for the same reasons. They fight at strength 8, and then they words are escaping me. Saves of 6 in the fight phase are a mortal wound back, So there were reasons behind doing everything the way that I did. So that was the list, right? Round 1, hit a gentleman named Kevin. He's actually one of my patrons on Patreon. Super nice dude. Loved playing the game with him, and the game was a lot closer than it looks. Um, as you can see, just based on my primaries, right? Turn 4 is when the game really changed, and I made a mistake. I actually made 2 mistakes that game, and both of those mistakes, Kevin is a good enough player that he was able to capitalize on them, and it's what swung the game. Because turn 4, we were actually like, I think we were tied, because I shut down his warp writ immediately, killed his wizard, and shut that down immediately. And turn 4 is when the game swung. And what happened turn 4, the first mistake I made actually was that I left my Hellions too far back and didn't move them up to keep them in a threatening position. And when I did that, right, uh, it gave him a little bit more freedom to maneuver, and I should have moved them up the board a little bit to get them into some terrain and hide them, and then improve their threat range. But what I was thinking was that if I left them a little bit back, it gave me more freedom to commit to either side. But really, what it did was it prevented me from being able to commit to any side. And so that was a positioning error on my end. And so that was mistake number 1, and that one isn't really what cost me the game. What cost me the game was he had his wizard and a pretty good screen in the middle of the board, right? And I just overcommitted to killing it, and there's a reason I overcommitted. Um, and I'm trying to think of the best way to word this because I'm not blaming dice at all. Because his dice were generally average, my dice were generally average. But what ended up happening was a lot of times, right? I would shoot into his units. So he'd have a unit of like 5 or 10 of the troops, and I would kill all but one, right? And so because I killed all but one, he was able to put a D3 back. And that happened multiple times, right? So it was one of those where at this point it was like, all right, he's got a 4-up invuln. He's been making the 4-up invulns. I'm gonna have to just like commit to make sure all this stuff is dead. And then what ended up happening was I overcommitted and overextended myself, and a good chunk of my army that was left was just trapped in the middle of the board. And because of that, again, Kevin is a good enough player that he could capitalize on it. And when he capitalized on it, what he ended up doing was just shooting the bulk of my army off the table. And it prevented me from really being able to score any primaries, as you can see. So, again, the big swing this game was turn 4 and turn 5. I didn't score any primaries, I didn't really hold any objectives. So, had I just played that a little differently, I could have had 8 more points, and it could have potentially prevented him from having an additional 8 points each battle round as well, which means that's a 16-point turnaround. I'm still losing the game, right? Because I go to 60, and then he goes to 65, 66. Uh, but again, it's a completely different game at that point. Uh, and I could have it's one of those where I also like would have prevented this from happening a little bit, and then the banners, his banners, and then it also would have helped me uh, probably get a couple more points on Herd the Prey had I just like showed a little bit of restraint. Um, So it's one of those where, again, I don't know that it changes the outcome of the game. It definitely makes it a different game, and it makes the score a lot tighter, right? And it was just because the main thing was just because I just overcommitted to the center of the board in an effort to clear out his wizard. 4 secondaries, right? And we did Data Scry Salvage. I'll actually pull that up real quick too so we can look at that. Data Scry Salvage. Boop, 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 boo. Do, 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 do. Some Thomas the Tank Engine. So here's your deployment. And the TO for this event, like he picked some of the hardest missions to play. And it's fine. I love them. I love that interaction. So, and so that was the mission. And for those not familiar with it, you have to control 2 objectives for 4 points, 3 objectives for 4 more, and then more objectives for 4. And then the mission bonus points is you do an action. Give me a second. I've never read the designer's note on this. Okay. Sorry. I've never read the mission, right? Or the designer's notes. You do an action on this objective right here in your deployment zone, and then you get 1 point for each no man's land objective you control. I actually really like that mission. I find it very interesting, and you have to think about what you're doing, right? All right, so, oh, that's not what we needed. There we go. Uh, so I took take them alive. You get 1 point for every unit you kill in melee, and you get 3 points for each character that you kill in melee. You also get 3 points for monsters. Um, so I can usually get 9 points on this. It's not a bad secondary. It is a hard secondary when you're playing like it makes you want to lean into melee a lot more, right? But it's really hard to just run an all melee army. You're gonna just get shot off the table by shooting armies, and it's a struggle. It's tough, right? Um, yes. Good call. For those that don't know, thank you, sir. For those that don't know, this is using Tabletop Battles, which is a Goonhammer app. It does track like statistics and everything else. And actually, while I'm thinking about it, we're gonna pull it up on my phone real quick because, sorry, I try not to pick this up because as soon as I do, it just gets bonkers. All right, so we're going to screenshot this. then we gotta move it in photos, right? Screenshots, boop. And all I'm doing right now is moving this so we can kind of go over that too. All right, so Tabletop Battles is a phenomenal app. It gives you a lot of stat tracking and lets you kind of know where you're scoring, how you're scoring, what you're struggling with, stuff like that. So you get a lot of good data out of it, and it is awesome. So thank you for saying that. It's just one of those where I had made a mental note to talk about the app, and you just reminded me. All right, so I did take them alive. And again, I got 9 on it. I can usually get 9. It just depends. I've had a couple games where I haven't done very well at it, but it's usually those games are usually games where uh like I don't kill characters or I kill them in shooting instead of melee. Because you just get a point every time something dies in melee. So it's one of those where it's pretty good. Or if I don't all the way kill them and then they fail leadership, like that will also kind of hamper that. Herd the Prey, I can usually get 8 to 12 on. Like, that has been a very good secondary for me. It does depend on deployment zones. And honestly, in this deployment zone, I wouldn't normally take it because it's real easy for your opponent to just hop that line and be like, and really they just have to be over this line. So they could actually deploy here if they wanted to, if they had a small enough unit, and just kind of cut you out immediately. And here. Fortunately, with Votan, they're a little slower, and that helps. And that's what I was banking on, was that they were just a little bit slower. And I think I actually did score 3 points turn one because I went first and he wasn't wholly within any table quarter. I'm not gonna obviously go back and change that. I just happened to think about it because it doesn't, again, it doesn't affect or change anything. So Heard the Prey's been pretty good. The third objective is typically where I struggle with this army because I can't get anything to be consistent. Like, I got 10 points on banners, but that's because I knew I was playing a slow army and I knew I could just sit on some of those objectives for a bit before he could get to me. So it's one of those where it makes sense. Uh, and it was easy. I got 10 points. Where I struggled was the primaries, and like I said, a lot of that had to do with the mistake that I had made turn 4. And again, you can look at the primary scores, and he jumps from 8 to 12, and I went from 4 to 0. That was the big difference. He did really good on grind. He only didn't get it one turn, and then raised the banners. He got 11 on, and again, a lot of the reason he had that 11 is because, once again, I botched that turn 4. Warprit, he only got 3 on. And that's why, or how I botched, is I just overcommitted to shut down that secondary. And really, I could have just set a singular unit in there, and it would have probably done enough work. Uh, it is what it is. Lessons learned, right? So my second game was against an Iron Hands list. Fortunately, I've already played against a few Iron Hands lists very similar to this, and I kind of knew what to expect going into it. We did this one on Abandoned Sanctuaries, so let's go ahead and pull that up before we dive into it. Abandoned Sanctuaries, and we were using the Nephilim pack, so you can't end a pre-game move in No Man's Land, and you can't forward deploy into No Man's Land. And then it's just a control 1 for 4, and then the bonus is just being within range of the middle of the board. You either control the center objective or you kill a unit within 6 inches. And Votan is one of those armies where it's hard to gauge, right? Just how much you need to send. And that's I don't know if you were in here for the very beginning of that, but Votan is one of those where it's hard to gauge because there were multiple times where I would kill all but like one model in his troop unit, and then he just bring like a D3 back. So that was a big reason why I decided to overcommit, because it was just like, man, I haven't. I think up until turn 3, I hadn't killed a whole unit yet. Uh, in a way, yeah. They're just tougher to kill, but they don't have the automatic reanimation protocols. It's just spamming the strat. And like I said, Kevin's a good dude, and he's a skilled opponent, and he earned that win. It was very good. I had a great game with him. So that's abandoned sanctuaries. Um, so I almost capped my primaries. I didn't get there all the way. That's okay. I usually go into games with Drukari probably expecting about 35 in primaries just because they don't have like staying power. So it's hard to continuously hold objectives, right? Um, I did take Herd the Prey. It did. It did. I took Herd the Prey, and I almost capped that one. No prisoners. I almost capped that one. Well, I did cap it. That's as high as I could get. I killed all his infantry, and then R&D I took. Um, and really, it's one of those where I struggle again. That's a third objective that I struggle with, and R&D doesn't usually do me very well. Like I just struggle with it. Unless I just build a list specifically for it. And I didn't build this one specifically for it. I just built it in a way that allowed me to take it if I felt like I needed to. Obviously, I played this one very well. Our terrain was really good. All the terrain layouts were good. So I have no complaints there. Everything went well. Really, the guy just kind of got outplayed. And it's one of those where he aggressively deployed his inceptors, and then I went first, and then I just killed them. Right? He had them up front where I could see them, and then I jumped my Trueborn up, and then just unloaded a bucket of dice at him, trying to force him to fail those saves. And then I strap moved them back the 7 inches so that I could get behind a terrain feature with it again. And then I put my Ravager out, and then I just like plinked off two of his aggressors. I think it was. Like I said, he just yeah, he just really he deployed very aggressively, and I was able to, even if he'd have gone first, I would have been able to capitalize because he just didn't have a ton of good range. Which is weird for an Iron Hands list, but there were some vehicles and some dreadnoughts. Like it was a good list. It's just one of those where he just didn't have a ton of good range, and so I was able to kind of capitalize on that. So my round one, I didn't kill a lot, but what I did kill was some of his stronger shooting units, right? Like he had inceptors and he had aggressors, and then there was something else. But he only had one melee unit, and that was Blade Guard. And he put the Blade Guard on one side of the table, and then I just put my whole army basically on the other side of the table, and was just like, cool. Now I don't have to worry about you getting into melee, and I can just kind of focus down all your shooting. Yeah, absolutely is risky. And that's honestly that's where he lost the game. I think is in deployment because he stopped having models on the table turn 3. So then the last game. So this score isn't quite right. I think it was like 67-85. I think I just missed 2 points for both of us, but the end result was the same. Um, that was a weird game, and I rarely will blame dice on anything or blame anything on dice, but I will 100% say that this game was lost to dice rolling, right? And I can cite a couple specific examples. I charged a dreadnought with Drazar, and it had the 4-up shield, whatever. And Drazar put over the course of because he just didn't fight Drazar. He fought other things that got into combat with him. Uh, and over the course of one, two, I think it was 3 fight phases, I had done a total of 4 damage with Drazar. The first fight phase, he made 8 out of 10 4-up invulnerable saves, right? And it wasn't just limited to that one interaction. Um, it was the whole game. And some games be like that, you know. Uh, it's exhausting when you're playing against it, right? Because you're just like, oh my gosh, could you please just one save, just fail one save? And a good example, another good example was I started with the Tantalus on the table, and I probably shouldn't have, right? Uh, he did have one unit of Eradicators that could get in range and shoot it. And again, that was my fault. I shouldn't have deployed it there, and I probably should have just started with it off the table, but we're going to kind of go over that afterward. Um, but they 100% hit and wounded me. So it was just like, okay, it is what it is. I can't fix it. I can't change it. And then, he had a unit of, I don't know if they were incursors or infiltrators, whatever. Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. And it's one of those, like I said, like 9 times out of 10, I can pinpoint where I lost a game. But looking at this one, with the way the dice were, there was just nothing I could do. I did the best that I could. I was able to score some primary points, um, and like Herd the Prey, like these 3 rounds right here are literally because he had one Marine left that just couldn't fail saves. I sent like 20 splinter shots into him and he just didn't fail saves. And then I charged him with a venom and then like put like 4 neg 1s on him and he just didn't fail saves. So it's one of those where again, one Marine denied me at least 1 point for the last 3 turns simply because he wouldn't fail saves. So it's one of those where, yeah, no, it was one of those games where it was like, all right, well, I guess this just isn't meant to be. AdMech is not an army to have one of those games against. If it's a skilled player, uh, they're going to give you the poopy duty. Yeah, and David's a great dude and he's a good player. Like I'm not trying to take anything away from him at all. He played his army very well. Uh he did what he was supposed to do. It's just one of those where I literally couldn't do anything. I just couldn't interact with the game. Uh and again, like in retrospect, I'm over it, but like I don't mind losing when I can pinpoint why I lost and I can learn from it and I can be like, oh, okay. Uh, it is infuriating as a player to go into a game and just know, like, okay, the dice are just gonna do this, and that's okay. And like I said, I'm not taking anything away from David. He played his army very well. He knew where to go with it and how to do it. He just had the dice. And then R&D, I kind of botched that one. And again, I don't usually take it because I don't like it. Because I don't stay on the table long with this army. So if you manage to kill my infantry, that's it. Like cool. I can't I can't do it. So I don't usually take it. Um, but it is what it is. No prisoners. I did get 7 points on. And again, that should clue you in because this like turn 4 and 5, right, is when I finally started killing infantry. Like that's how brutal it was. I think turn 4 I killed all his Thunderwolf cav, uh, and that felt good. Just because it's like, yeah, it's all 4-ups, but I'm just gonna hit him with splinter weapons. I don't care. And eventually he did fail some saves, but um, and that one was on tie to conviction. I'm just reading your message here. Yeah, yes and no. It's one of those where it's just that it's a dice game. Uh, and that's what it is. It's an RNG, and you can't battle RN Jesus. Sometimes he just got your number, and that's okay. Um, and honestly, that was also the Iron Hands and the Space Wolves that I played were my first times playing against post Data Slate Marines. So I also kind of went into it not knowing what to expect. Um, so it was a bit of a learning experience anyway, right? So it's good to have that like learning experience anyway, because now that I know what to expect from like a Space Wolves list and an Iron Hands list, like that I'm not making some of the same plays. Like I'm just gonna change the way I approach it, and I know what to expect out of it. Um, all right, so and that was Tide of Conviction, which is this mission right here, and you score points for controlling your opponent's. At the end of the turn, you get 2 points for controlling one in your opponent's territory, and at the end of the game, you get 2 points for each and 4 points for this. And honestly, like that was big. I was able to score, I think, 8 points on that. Um, so that was real big, you know. Yeah. And I did well on my primaries. I just couldn't do anything on the secondaries because my secondaries are predicated around killing models. And again, like he just wouldn't die, and it was exhausting. But like I said, it does help. I do I do uh I do change the way I approach it. For my list, some takeaways, right? Let's jump back over here. I think for one, if I were to do this over again, I'm probably just playing Poison Tongue, or I'm doing the sixes explode and wounds of six or an additional AP. With there being no AOC, having an additional pip of rend on the splinter weapons, even if it's just occasionally, is going to feel good. And having the sixes explode is a much more fun mechanic, right? Like I don't know mathematically. I'm not going to sit here and break it down. I don't know mathematically which one's going to end up being better, but I personally like sixes explode as a mechanic, so I should have just played that. Like that's is what it is. And then Poison Tongue just gives you Poison 3 for all your guns, so it just makes them all 16% more efficient into almost everything. So, again, probably would do that if I had to do it over again. As far as the Tantalus goes, right? I've played a lot of games with it, and I love it. It's fun, but it doesn't usually do anything, and it's just 220 points that doesn't do a ton and then evaporates. So I think I'm in a competitive league right now, and I've got the Tantalus in my list. And I think for the league, I'm just gonna put it in reserve almost every game, right? I'm gonna put my Trueborn into it. I'm gonna put it in reserve every game. I'm gonna bring it out, and I'm gonna get at least one round of shooting out of it. And then even if I have to make a 9-inch charge, like I at least get to roll it because I don't think I've rolled a charge roll for this thing more than once because it just dies so fast. And so I think that's kind of how I approach it is I put it in reserves. Drukhari have a 1 CP strat where you can actually disembark from a transport if it comes from off the table. So if I needed to, I could bring the Tantalus out, dump the Trueborn out onto an objective, for instance, and then shoot, and then charge, and then move on with my life. It's a 9-inch charge, so I'm not likely to make it. But if I save the CP for the reroll, uh, and I got like a 35% chance hitting a 9 with a reroll. My math might be a little bit off there, but it's not too far off. So it's one of those where like, cool, you know, I'd rather do that than it just like get shit off the board before I use it. I'm gonna keep playing with it because I love the model. Uh, is it good? Maybe. I think it's very matchup specific. If you're playing against a very shooting army like a Tau army, uh, no, it's just gonna evaporate. So you need to just reserve it and shoot with it. At 18 wounds, it basically can't hide, so there's not really much you could do with it. Um, so I think the play, especially now that there's free strat reserves, I think the play is to just reserve it every game, bring it down, get some shooting out of it, at least roll a charge roll, even if it's to just fish for an Overwatch or something for other units to charge in. I just feel like that's a better play than uh, here it is, shoot it off the board. So, and this tournament was like the first time I ever used it, to be fair. So there was a lot of new things going on at the tournament. Once I finish this league, I'll do a recap on the league, and then once I finish I got a tournament next week. I'm going to do a recap on that. And actually, I will go over my list for that, and then I want to go over the tabletop battles, and that might be where we end. I have a Craft Worlds video I need to finish, and I might work on that afterward. There we go. All right, so this is what I'm bringing to League, and this is after like playing in the tournament, right? So we're doing a space raid, and I said, hey, I struggle with space raids. So when I am just not good with something, I just force myself to do it. I'm just like, okay, this is really hard. I'm gonna do it. So we've got Archon, we got Big Dick Drazar, we got the Homunculus, and we got a Succubus. I did Alliance of Agony to give the Homunculus a Warlord trait. I think he's got Twisted Reanimator, Master Regenerist, so he regenerates 3 wounds instead of D3. Um, and then the Succubus is same Succubus I always take. And then this handsome lad, all he has is just the Helm of Spite. I made sure I brought it this time, and it was relevant. Like, I played a game against Night Lords last night, and it was relevant. I didn't kill anything, but being able to deny, like, put extra damage on his, I don't know what it is, the Demon Chariot. It was a Night Lords Demons combo list, and it's pretty gross, and he's pretty good with it, so that was cool. I think I lost that one by like 10 points, but the leadership mechanics are a hard counter for the way I like to play the game. I tend to play fairly infantry heavy lists, so anything that can just be like you make a leadership and now you're picking up extra models in an additional phase can be a little brutal. So it's one of those where I just go into it going, okay, this is going to be an uphill battle, and I'm going to do what I can. So yeah, that's it. Those are our HQs, right? I've got my 10 man of Blood Brides. And again, I don't know. I'm so mixed on them because they're are weapon skill 2, but at the same time, everything gets +1 to hit starting turn 3. So it's like, I don't know if it's worth it. Because this is a space raid, my Archon has a 6-inch aura of reroll hit rolls of 1 for all core. It's no longer Cabalite locked, right? My Cabal is Poison Tongue. My Witch Cult is Cursed Blade. And then I'm doing a custom Homunculus Coven. And the custom Coven is 6s explode in the fight phase and then +1 strength. So even with poison weapons, you still get to use your strength. Like let's look at this Homunculus real quick, right? So he's strength 3, uh, but he's got Edward Scissorhands, right? But they're poison 4, and that just means that they automatically wound on 4s. But if I fight something T3, I still get to use my strength, right? So it's one of those where the +1 strength, not super relevant most of the time with the infantry stuff, but it is relevant, right? And then I got some Trueborns, obviously, Blaster, Dark Lance. And then Cabalites. I just a 5-man unit for just it's actually I think a, yeah, it's a 6-man because I got the Sybarite, and they just go in Venom, right? And then 2 5-man Iraqs, and those 5-man rack units are just for chilling out and holding objectives in the back and stuff like that. That's it. We've got 5 grotesques. These things are bonkers, and I love them so much. 35 points, right? They get you their T5 with 4 wounds, a 6-up save, but they also get power from pain. And then they have a 5-up feel no pain, and they still move 7 inches. So they still are pretty mobile, and they get advance and charge from power from pain. They have 2 melee weapons. They have a flesh gauntlet, and every time an attack is made from this weapon, if it's not a vehicle, unmodified wound rolls of 6 are a mortal wound on the target in addition to any damage. And then they also have a cleaver. And the cleaver is strength user, neg 2, 2 damage. So it's one of those where I don't know. The Flesh Gauntlet's okay. I think it's better if you play the faction that gives you an additional pip of rend in the fight phase because then they at least go to -1. But the cleaver just gives you a bonus attack and it's 2 damage. I'm just going to use the cleaver every time. You can replace the cleaver with a liquefier, which could be pretty good too, but then it's also a 5-point upgrade. Um, but because of the Coven I run, right, these go to strength 6. So if they're within range of a homunculus, and because of the faction I run, they're strength 6 T6, 6 up invuln, 5 up feel no pain. They're pretty spicy. Like they do some good work. If you can get all 5 of them into combat, that's going to be 25 dice sixes explode, hitting on threes, hitting on twos if it's turn 3, and then their core, so they get reroll hit rolls of 1 from the Archon. And that's exactly what happened. Like I played that Night Lords player, I put 4 of them into his possessed, and because he managed to kill one, I put 4 of them into his possessed, and it was 20 dice. It was hitting on twos, re-rolling ones. You know, sixes explode. So I think out of my 20 hits, I got like 25 or 25 dice. I got like 25 hits, and then they are wounding him on threes because they're strength 6. So it was just like, here's a bunch of dice, buddy, and they're all 2 damage. So they're really good. I have enjoyed that was my first game using them last night, and I enjoyed them immensely. Let's see. Hellions, it's just a 5-man, and then the 5 incubi. Uh, Again, the Hellions are weird. I love them. I'm gonna keep playing them, but I feel like I could probably get more utility out of something else. But they also have 2 damage swings, which is nice. 5 scourges with haywire blasters. And yeah, super money, right? The Haywire Blasters, and again, these are core, so they'll get reroll hit rolls of 1 from my Archon because it's a space raid. So when they come out, it's at least going to be 4 D3 shots hitting on 4s, rerolling 1s. So, like, they put some spicy damage on a Land Raider. And really, that was the other big thing, is that there's not a lot in the Drukhari Codex that can deal with T9 efficiently or effectively. um, Outside of Haywire, and most of the things that can take Haywire are just hitting on 4s most of the game. Like the Talos hits on 4s innately, and then if these guys move, they hit on 4s. So it's one of those where there's just no good efficient way. We don't have las cannons that hit on 3s, re-rolling 1s to hit them. We don't have like the Harlequin Haywire on bikes where they just like hit on 3s and get an additional shot. Like Drukhari just are gonna struggle into Chaos Land Raiders, and this guy has 3 of them, and it's hilarious. I love it. Um, 2 Talos, they'll fight at they just have the macro scalpels, so they fight at strength 8 because the scalpels +1 -2 damage, and then the Coven gives them +1, and then because I have 2 scalpels, they get an additional attack, so it's 6 attacks per guy, so that's 12 dice, so they're real good. I do like them. The Tantalus. And the Tantalus, I think I gave it Poison Tongue for that game specifically last night, but I don't think I'm going to anymore. I think it's either getting the Witch Cult or I think it's getting the Homunculus Coven. It doesn't matter to me because they both give it +1 strength. The only difference is, do I want my saving throws of 6 to be immortal back in the fight phase, or do I want the other thing? I don't know. 6s explode in the fight phase. You know, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Again, I didn't really get to do much with it, and I think we just got to a point now where it's like, okay, I'm just going to uh, make sure I reserve it every game. If I bring it, it's getting reserved, and I'm taking it to Lafayette. So I've got it in the league. I'm taking it to the tournament I'm doing on Saturday. We're doing a GT in March, and I'm not going to be able to take it to the GT because it is a combo of 3D printed and not 3D printed stuff. So, and they have a pretty strict no 3D printed stuff policy, which is fine. Like, I'm sure they allow bits, but Probably half this boat is printed and half of it isn't, which is fine. I'm not worried about it. I can reconstruct a whole new list, or I can just play what I'm doing and just bring 220 points of other things. I can bring a lot of racks for 220 points, right? And then a Raider, and then two Venoms, uh, and then the Raider and the Venoms are all Poison Tongue, and that's just so they can redeploy if I need them to. And again, I don't know, maybe I change them, but for now, that's what we're doing. Um, they you won't be able to when I'm done because I'm like smoothing some of the little like print lines out. Like it's a resin, and it's high resolution. Uh, Most people don't know when they look at it, but if they were to come up and actually like really look, they would figure it out real quick because 3D printed resin is very hard and brittle, whereas like Forge World resin is kind of soft and pliable. So again, if somebody were to like pick it up and move it around and stuff, they would figure it out real quick. Um, I'm going to probably talk to the TO and see if he's gonna care. And if he doesn't, I may bring it. I don't know because it's a GT. Like this is a 5 round event, and I would like to come back at least 3-2 would be my goal. But we'll see. I've got about a month to get it figured out. So that's my big fat league list and probably what I'm taking to Lafayette. Um, there was one other thing I wanted to touch on here. Uh, let's refresh you. So, all right. These are my stats for Drukari. All right. I've played 30 games with them since deciding. Really, that's over the last month. I've played basically a game a day over the last month. And I have a 56.7% win rate. So these are some of the stats that Tabletop Battles will help you track, which is one of the things I do like about this app. I have 17 wins and 13 losses, two of which, actually, three of which came over the last week, right? Um, this win streak is never accurate. It's just not because I lost last night. So I don't know why it says current streak 2. It is what it is. But I've played 30 games. My go first win rate is 63.2%. My go second is 40. And that is where I've really struggled with this army is if I go second, right? Um, it's weird. And a lot of it I think has to do with if your opponent goes first, they understand what your army does. They can better mitigate your advance and charge abilities, and I do think that plays into it. Um, we'll see. I've got some concepts that I'm going to be working on, but that's it, man. Like I love that I can get this kind of data. I can actually get matchup specifics, like what's my record into Tau, what's my record into Marines, what's my record into this, and really, like because I can, let's actually filter. So into Chaos Space Marines, I have 2 wins with Drukari out of 8 games played, and again, uh, I think 3 of those are into this Night Lords dude, right? So 6 losses, half of them are into Night Lords, and it's 3 Land Raiders, and I just struggle because again, most of the shooting in that army is strength 8 at best, and there's not much that they have that can interact with it outside of Haywire. And again, Haywire, I have to look, but I don't think there's anything that shoots Haywire that isn't hitting on 4s inherently, right? So it's like it's just that T9 hurdle. They don't really have tools to get over it. I'll get it figured out. And the leadership, right? Because I tend to play infantry heavy lists. Yeah, Chaos Land Raiders are T9. No, they don't buff them at all. Well, they buff one because they have like a Warp Smith who gives them +1 to hit. And all the Chaos Space Marine Land Raiders are T9. Um, and again, like I've got to dig into this codex, but I don't think there's a ton. uh, there you go. I don't. So the Great Unclean one is actually T9, if I remember right. Also, I think it's T8, but there's a way to upgrade it to T9. It's silly. I love it. Um, but at least with the Great Unclean one, my poison works. Whereas like with the Land Raider, my poison doesn't work, and even if it did, like if I use the strat to make it work, it's got a 2-up save, right? So it's just like, sure, I can throw a lot of dice at it, but my Succubus does kill Land Raiders by herself. Um, so that's a thing. But yeah, so out of the 6 games I've lost into Chaos Marines, 3 of them have been into Night Lords. Yeah, no, it's one of those where, so and I think Marines are better than people realize, and I think Marines are better than the the bulk of the player base, if that makes sense. Um, I think in order for Marines to like really be competitively good, you just have to think outside the box a bit, right? Um, and interestingly, the Space Wolves player, I'm not saying he got the idea from me. I have no idea. I'm sure he might have thought of it on his own. He might have seen somebody else talk about it. But a lot of his game plan was predicated around some of the stuff I had been saying. With sticky objectives, forward deploying, and just being like, cool, I control all these objectives. I'm putting banners down, blah, 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 blah. So, but yeah, um, I think 2 of those losses are do. Right. Well, and then he's got a detachment of demons, and he takes the Slanesh demons, which have a 6-inch -1 leadership aura also. And so they'll stack because they're different auras, right? So it's one of those where he can take leadership 9 and bring it down to 6. And then he's got a lot of possessed, which have a demonkin. So he can actually take a leadership 9 and put it down to 5. And that's where the other struggle is that he's just wounding my whole army basically on 2s for the most part. Um, so that got a little spicy. But it was a great game. We had fun. My other I've got a Black Legion loss in here, so that is what it is. I am 50% win rate into Votan, uh, and it's all effectively the same list. It's 2 different guys that have very similar lists. But I've only played 4 games into Votan with Drukari, and up until the tournament, I was what 2 out of 3, and then I lost the one. So into Craft Worlds, I'm 100% win rate into Craft Worlds. And then into Orcs, I've only played 2 games against Orcs. I've lost them both. But a lot of that is the guy I've lost to is an extremely good Orc player. And I think I went second both of those games, right? And that again is where I struggle with this army. Uh, I'm 50% right now into Tau, according to this. 100% into Chaos Knights win. Let's see. 100% win rate into Harlequins. 100% win rate into Tyranids, Death Guard, Dark Angels, and a 50% win rate into Space Wolves. 100% win rate into Iron Hands. So it's one of those where the big struggles for me are CSM. And I think a lot of it just happens to be the CSM that I'm playing against on a consistent basis, like the Night Lords, just spicy. If your leadership is 5, you get +1 to wound in the fight phase. And so, like, because I tend to play a melee centric build and I'm T3, most of the stuff is just wounding me on 2s all the time. So it's interesting. And I'm doing better in it now or into it now than I have before. And honestly, again, like last night, I didn't start with the Tantalus in reserve. I probably should have. It didn't do anything besides nothing. It did nothing. Sorry. That was it. It didn't do anything. So yeah, I think the Tantalus goes into reserves from here on out unless you just don't have any shooting, and it's big. It is like massive. Okay, if you've not seen one, it is easily this long. This is two rhinos, and it's easily this wide. It's basically like four rhinos. It's insanely huge. You would expect it to do something other than just like BT7 with a 3-up save. It does have the 5-up invuln. It's a super weird unit, a super weird model. And I think if I were playing like Blackheart or uh, to get advance and charge turn one, or something else that really just like affects the Tantalus, like ignore cover and 2 inches of movement or whatever, uh, it'd probably feel a bit better. But because I'm just running it like a clown, uh, I'm sure that's a big part of it. So I think it goes into strat reserves, and I think we just bring it out. And if somebody gets into my deployment zone, I get to come out in combat, and I think that's what we do. So I think that's going to wrap up my tournament video today. I think we're going to close out with a big thank you to the subscribers and the viewers. You guys are awesome. I appreciate you. And I think we go ahead and stop so I can get some work done on this Far-Flung Craft Worlds video. And have a great day, guys.